to the White House that unlike the process that was used with the majority memo, that the Department of Justice and FBI be consulted, that they have the opportunity to vet any information that they may be concerned about. In our memo, in terms of sources and methods, we want to make sure that those that are in the best position to vet that have the opportunity to do so. The Department of Justice and FBI have already had our memo for several days. We also want to make sure that any redactions that are made are fully explained to our committee by the FBI or Department of Justice, and likewise by the White House. We want to make sure that the White House does not redact our memo for political purposes, and obviously that's a deep concern. The majority found themselves in an insupportable position when they released a misleading memo and refused to release the Democratic response. So I think they were compelled to take the action they did today. And we think this will be very useful information for the American people to see. I also want to say that my colleague, Mr. Quigley, again and repeatedly asked the chairman whether he or any of his staff had consulted with, coordinated, conceptualized this memo in combination with the White House. We know, after all, that the chairman embarked on a similar effort to coordinate a campaign early on in the investigation. And once again, Mr. Nunes refused to answer the questions. At the very end of the hearing, he gave a very lawyerly written response, or read a written response, saying that the White House had not been involved in the actual drafting of the memo. But in terms of whether it was coordinated with the White House or they were consulted or strategized, the whole concept, he refused to answer those questions. And obviously that's a very important question for our committee. The reality is that as this investigation has progressed, our own, perhaps more significantly the investigation by Bob Mueller, as more and more individuals have either been indicted or pled guilty in connection with this investigation, and the evidence has mounted, both in terms of the issue of collusion as well as the issue of obstruction. There is a rising sense of panic, clearly, within the White House and as well on the Hill. And as a result, we see a tactic we have often seen in criminal cases where, when the facts are increasingly incriminating of the defendant, there's an effort to put the government on trial. And so that brings us to where we are today, where our committee, Republicans, have endeavored to put the FBI on trial, put the Department of Justice on trial, impeach and impugn the hard work of these dedicated public servants at the FBI and the Department of Justice. We think this very ill serves the public, and we hope that they will stop. But nonetheless, the chairman has announced his intention to continue with other phases of this so-called investigation into the FBI and the Department of Justice and maybe other agencies. He has publicly described this memo as phase one. In fact, it's phase two. Phase one began with the midnight run and the presentation to the White House of information he'd gotten from the White House. So this is phase two. We hope these phases of distraction will come to an end, and once again the committee will focus on what the Russians did to interfere in our election, what we know about the Trump campaign's contacts and communication or collusion with the Russians, and what we can do to prevent this from happening in the future. So that's where we hope our investigation will get back on track. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.